Good evening, everyone. Let me welcome you to another episode of MK Speaks. I'm happy to be your host tonight. I am Mary Ann Kyle. Tonight's episode is really, I think, meaningful and powerful because it deals with mental health issues with our creative partners and our creative colleagues. And so we're very honored to have with us Philip Searcy tonight. I'm going to actually let my guests introduce themselves. So Philip, please take a moment to let our listeners and our viewers know who you are.
Thank you. Again, my name is Philip Searcy. I'm a licensed clinical social worker practicing in South Carolina, and I am co-owner of a outpatient mental health practice. It's a group practice called Therapy Group that opened in 2019.
Perfect. So,
Yeah, my name is Joe Hernandez. I'm glad to be back on again with MK Speaks. I'm the owner of JMH Media, as well as a marketing professional in the corporate world with experience in theater for the last 20 years or so.
we've been talking a little bit prior to this recording about sort of the state of the affairs with the creative economy, particularly with mental health, and how we're dealing with changes post-COVID, how many of our teachers and colleagues are dealing with burnout related to the changing economy and related to a lot of the issues that we face in the world. So, Philip, would you tell us a little bit? I know you're an actor and you're a mental health professional, but can you tell us a little bit about your journey as an actor and as a mental health professional?
Yeah, it seems always interesting how people respond when I told them that my undergraduate degree was a double major in theater and psychology, and it's there's a lot of drama in theater, and so it really kind of lend itself to seeing a lot of different personality types. I'll tell you that. But jokingly, not jokingly, really, I really initially thought that I would be interested in getting into the arts and acting, and then becoming a therapist, and then becoming a therapist for actors. That was kind of my OG plan back in the day. But I've always known, honestly, since really from high school. I started to realize that a lot of my friends would come to me and talk to me about their issues and what was going on, and I just seemed to be that person that people confided in, and I really enjoyed it. I liked being able to help people, and so I remember senior year in high school, I in my mind mentally, I said I was one day going to become a therapist. Had no idea what all that would entail, but it was a vision from a teenage brain. But I was drawn into the arts. I just always have really loved theater in particular, and so once I got into undergrad, because I outside of church stuff, I'd really not done much performance stuff on stage. So I tried out acting in undergrad and fell in love. My first show was Annie, and I was Mr. Bundles, and so it was a fun role. And then being able to be in the chorus, and I just fell in love with it and felt that was my tribe. That was like who I needed to be around. Because honestly, I almost considered changing schools before I took that first acting class. But it was just infiltrated into the arts, and I did that throughout undergrad, and then I worked in film and television post grad, post graduation from undergrad, and loved it. But it got to a spot where my heart was pulling me back into the mental health world and helping people in a different capacity. And so I went back to grad school, and then so on and so on through the path to become where I am today.
I always joke with teachers, we talk about the fact that we're voice teachers and acting teachers, but we're also half-time mental health professionals. And that's what being empathetic as an actor and a performer and being a teacher and that therapist, that where that empathy comes into play. You're like, ooh, okay. You see where these two worlds meet. So
absolutely.
For me, I can understand how that was not such a big jump for you to do that.
No, it really wasn't. No.
Yeah. We are talking about performers that are in the midst of their degree or in the midst of their career field. And we know, of course, the landscape has changed over time. And so when you're working with creatives, particularly in a therapeutic environment, how do you talk with them about some of the harsh realities that they're facing in this world in terms of making a living, pursuing a career in this?
Um, I mean, the harsh realities, that I like that phrasing. I think it's very, very real, very raw. It is harsh. It's a tough time. And at the same time, not but, and that's the way I always talk to people is like, but is the most invalidating word we can use, and is the most validating, right? If I went to my wife and said, "You suck at cooking, but I love you," right? Or "I love you, but you suck at cooking," right? It takes it away. And so saying, "I love you and you suck at cooking," right? That holds more weight, even though I would never say that to her. So I would say it is a harsh reality, and we we can persevere, right? We can push through. It's going to be very uncomfortable, but it's realizing that we are strong enough to overcome. Sometimes we allow that weight of the reality, how harsh it is and what's going on, to hold us down. And I think we don't hold enough weight into our how much we have already overcome, and how much that really does hold weight. We I think because things don't always hold weight in our head, it's so easy to minimize, and it's so easy to look down on, oh, well, that wasn't that hard, so it didn't hold that much weight, right? And I was guilty of it too. I mean, even going through grad school, I was, you know, almost a 4.0 GPA, but I didn't think I was good enough because I knew I didn't read every textbook. I didn't, and dive deep into every scholarly article that I was supposed to read. And so I would hold myself to this high standard. And so it was allowing myself to not look at, okay, these were all of the other things that I overcame. And so it's so important for us to really take a step back and say, yes, this is hard, and we've already overcome this much. That is okay. We can keep doing it.
Yeah, that's interesting. That kind of brings up, I know we uh, we talk a lot about having imposter syndrome, and a lot of my teachers that I work with and mentor talk about as full-blown professionals having imposter syndrome. And so here they are, they've been in the field for 20 years. And they say, well, I didn't do enough, I didn't sing enough, I feel this way about my voice, or I feel this way about my acting abilities. Therefore, I really can't be an authority with my students, yet they have to be an authority. And so what happens is they don't speak out that they have imposter syndrome. But of course, it emerges, sort of unsaid in their teaching and in their practice. I always tell them that leaks out sideways.
Right.
And they really battle this, and they forget, I think, in my opinion, I don't know how you feel about this, that their experience, they move along through life, they're picking up the experiences to be an authority. I think they sort of discount that in the long run.
Yes. Yes. I have, my instant thought is what Brene Brown, I'm sure you're familiar with Brene Brown, right? Good. She's incredible. And, what she always says is that at the core, everyone is fear and shame. And a majority of the time, it's fear, and it's fear of having more evidence to shame ourselves. Right? Fear of having more evidence to shame ourselves, that we know every single thing in our head that nobody else knows, all the people that we've hurt, all the mean things we've said or mean things people have said to us, every mistake we've ever made. We have to live with that. And that feeds and fuels that imposter syndrome. And until we actually speak it and feel it, we cannot release it.
I like that. Have you ever dealt with in your practice professionals that really suffer from imposter syndrome? And how do you help them through that process?
Oh man, it's tough because I'm human myself. I'm a therapist. I've studied this. I work with people every day, and I have to practice what I preach. I feel like I struggle with it myself, and I'm not scared to say it because it's such a real thing. And I think that's where our society really lacks, is in the vulnerability and allowing ourselves to truly show who we are and not just wear the mask of what we want other people to see us as, because we think we know what they want. And it's such a difficult dynamic, because until we've truly been authentic with someone, we don't really know that they really accept us, right? Because we know, like, I haven't told them everything. So if that, I have people in my office all the time. If somebody knew this about me, they wouldn't still like me, right? They wouldn't still look at me the same. They wouldn't still respect me. And so we've got to remember all of that evidence that's in our head. It's the voice through which we talk to ourselves. And it's what we call in the therapeutic world automatic intrusive thoughts. They're automatic, they're intrusive. We don't want them there, and they're there. And if we don't become intentional at challenging them, not stopping them, there's the bad misconception that people feel that they have to thought stop. They have to prevent themselves from thinking something. But it's like the old thought of, don't think about a purple elephant.
The purple elephants there. Exactly.
So anything that we tell ourselves not to think about, we think about more. And that's why some people struggle with sleep at night. They're like, don't think. And they just keep thinking. And so it's more leaning into that, and it's saying, what is this thought, and what is the opposite, right? It's saying, okay, yeah, I think these people are worried, or dislike me. What evidence do I have? Now, what it's just as possible that they're not thinking about me at all, right? And so it's getting into that habit of recognizing the thought, challenging it, and then we can actually feel more in control. And that's what the therapeutic process is. It's not trying to change someone. It's trying to say, all right, how can we fine tune, right? I always give the example of the old school radio, right? Where you actually had to turn the knob to get there. You could get close enough where you could tell what song was playing. It's just not enjoyable,
Mhm.
right? But once you fine tune and you hit the sweet spot, now the music is enjoyable. And that's what I think therapy is about. It's getting people to a spot where they can live a life that's actually worth living.
Yeah, and I, again, as you say things, it really makes me want to ask you about certain experiences. One of the things I love challenging the teachers and the artists that I train is to actually try not to figure out the answer to something or figure out how they're going to process something, but allow their minds to be quiet. Now, oftentimes we talk about the theta state, getting themselves from the beta state to the theta state.
Mhm.
But that requires that they let go of a lot of their preconceptions of how they're going to make something happen and just let their intuition, their minds, and their bodies speak to them. And as actors and singers, you think we would be okay with jumping off into that unknown space. Yet more and more, I come in contact with performers and teachers who want to know exactly how to pull that trigger and analyze everything that they want to do along the way. And it gets in the way of them being authentic, really honest on stage. Joe and I have talked about this a lot. So I know you can speak to that sort of fear of letting go and being authentic in the moment.
Yeah, I think sometimes we find comfort in the misery because we don't know any different. And so it is scary to think of what change would not only entail to get to, but look and feel like. And so you're right. It's a very, it can almost be a very paralyzing moment. And and going back to and I don't know if I fully answered your question about the imposter syndrome. It's remembering, especially as a teacher, right? Especially I'm talking to young therapists who, since I'm a clinical supervisor and I'm working with young therapists who are trying to get into the field, it's saying, okay, you know more than they do already. So you know how to find the answers. If somebody comes to you and asks you something that you feel incapable of answering, you know how to find the answer a lot faster than they do. And that can help fight that imposter syndrome.
I like that. I like that a lot, because that seems to be the thing that most people that I come in contact with suffer from. And these can be teachers that have been teaching for 40 plus years. And yeah, I mean, and even through my own therapeutic process, as I've gone through therapy this year, and I've done EMDR and several other types of therapy, as a fully formed woman in her 50s, being willing to plow through that emotionally and work through that is super scary.
Yeah.
I mean,
what do you think about EMDR?
Well, first of all, that has been life-saving for me, because I love talk therapy, but EMDR has been the thing that has allowed my brain to rewire,
Yes.
totally rewire around those traumatic experiences, to the point where, look, when I started EMDR therapy, and my therapist actually is a pianist and a dancer, she's great, and she's in Colorado, but when I started EMDR therapy, I was like, this is going to be so much, woo, I can't even stand it. She was like, okay. But so when I started it, and it was, Philip, it was very difficult from a physical, traumatic, emotional standpoint. And for 24 hours after that, it was very difficult. I had physical headaches and things, but it was amazing how I woke up 2 days later and everything felt different. I felt less reactive, and it was like, what? And it's just, we talk about it all the time, about how the brain can remap itself.
Yes, exactly.
And the amygdala doesn't have to run your entire freaking life. And so I was just like, okay, I'm sorry.
Yep.
And the best thing about that was when I figured out how that impacted my teaching, how that brain mapping impacted my teaching, to enable my students to get from that paralyzing analytical form of practice to that theta state creativity. Once I understood how the brain actually mapped the physicality of technique and artistry, and got to the point where it could let go of that and go to creativity, it was like, oh, the angels sang at that moment. Anyway, but I did.
Well, yeah, and just for those who are not familiar with EMDR, it's just quickly, it's a lot, but even the name is a mouthful, right? It's eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, right? So it is a very just bizarre therapeutic approach that utilizes eye movements, like in your REM sleep, to create a bilateral stimulation where you get your left brain, your right brain active at the same time. It's similar to like a runner's clarity. After you go for a long run, people often feel like they have more clarity. It's because that left foot, right foot pounding on the ground gives that same similar bilateral stimulation. And so doing that in a therapeutic sense with a specific purpose of not just, some people get concerned about trauma work because they feel like they have to relive everything again, but it's more trying to attack belief systems that come from trauma and how to rewire them and literally open up new neural pathways. And so anybody that's interested, that's something, Joe, I can give you some things on links and stuff to add, but it is an amazing therapeutic approach for sure. And I'm super glad that you got to do that, and the benefits, and it probably didn't take you that long, right?
It did not. It took me less than 6 months, but I didn't start therapy until I was 56 years old. And a lifetime of stuff basically was rewired. And the difference it has made, not just in my personal life, with my relationships, the difference it has made in my teaching, in my awareness, and in my life as a singer and an actor has been incredible. I just didn't know what I was missing.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Well, thank you for
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you for that. And thank you for clarifying for everyone who's not familiar with that therapeutic approach, what that actually is. And I can tell you, I'm a believer. All right. So I know one of the things Joe and I talk about a lot is, particularly post-COVID in this new creative environment, how collaboration has impacted us. you know, we find ourselves isolated in COVID. We find ourselves occasionally as artists isolating ourselves. But yet, in the act of collaboration, we are creating what Joe and I call our culture. You called it the tribe. We've called it the tribe before too. But how powerful that culture that we allow ourselves to be a part of and the connectivity with people, how powerful that is in our creative lives, not just as people, but as working professionals. How would you speak to that, Philip?
I mean, I truly believe that collaboration across the board, no matter whether it's mental health and me collaborating with other mental health professionals in different specialties in the area, or across the artistic platform, it is. I think it's something that has been around forever that kind of gets lost, because when we become very isolated and think that we know it all, I really feel like we're going to hit a wall, a ceiling a lot faster. Collaboration is saying other people have ideas and other people have energy that they can bring to a you know a plan or a structure or a team approach that's going to just blossom, beyond what I think we can do on our own. And that's why I think, you think of anybody, Steve Jobs, right? He had to surround himself and collaborate with other people that without he would have never gotten to where he was, right? And so I think we understand it in that capacity, in like the tech world, that you've got to have really awesome people in all these pieces. But then when we get into things like community theater, right? It's we feel that there's this wall, and so it's like, no, okay, yeah, there are other people. We've got to let them in. But sometimes I think our pride and ego can get in the way. That's for sure.
Yeah, but can I ask a question just about that? It's interesting as we were discussing, or the way you were discussing collaboration. I also think there's a not just internally within maybe our own tribes or our own areas of expertise, but I think honestly a recent conversation that you and I've had, Philip, you calling me about this new idea that you have working, bouncing these ideas. I think at the root of it, it goes down to, please correct me if you think different, but it goes down to the trust and the ability to be vulnerable, right? Going back to what you were talking about. Can you either agree with that, or can you expand maybe your thoughts on just that piece, how you can cross, do you know what I mean, between these different areas?
Yeah, and I think that that's a I think that there's yes, the short answer is yes, I agree. I can speak to that. The longer answer is I think we can have different kind of compartments in our head of how we've got folks that we collaborate with that are going to be more on a professional sense, right? But then, yeah, we've got people we can collaborate, like you and I in our friendship. I trust you and allow myself to be vulnerable with you. So I think I'm going to collaborate with you in a different way, where I'm going to receive feedback a lot different, right? And so I think that brings a really good point, that we may need to be intentional at having different branches of who we collaborate with, because not everyone can meet every need, right? My wife can't meet every need for me, and that's why I have friends, and that's why we have people that we hang out with at work or that we talk to in a professional sense. And so I think that collaboration and looking at it as like, if you're only ever collaborating with one group, right, what are you missing out on? But yeah, the vulnerability piece, that's going to be always the most difficult for folks. And if you want to learn a lot about vulnerability, that would be a perfect Brene Brown thing. Her original TED Talk that's easily accessible online. I'll give you some links for that, Joe. But she also has a Netflix special. Her most recent book is incredible. So it's, she is an expert in the world of vulnerability, and the way she expresses that is a vulnerability in society is looked at as weakness, but there's never a time that you have to be vulnerable that doesn't take strength. And I think that's a powerful message, that if anybody wants to dive more into that vulnerability to up their collaboration and creative world, please check her out.
Yeah, that's an excellent. That's an excellent point. And I was going to say that we try to train ourselves as actors and singers and our students as well on being vulnerable on stage. And that's a very difficult place for them to get because it requires that they sort of open themselves up to possible hurt and possible criticism, and they're not willing to do that. I talk to my students a lot about this idea of culture, and I say to them, before you can be a good actor or a good singer, you have to be a good person. You have to treat yourself well first, yourself well, and then others well. And in that kind of environment, they're more able to be honest and vulnerable as a character. So we call it being versus performing with students. And that can be a tough place for young performers to be, where they're encouraged to just go out there and just, hit the money note, kill, kill, kill.
Well, there's a quote by David Foster Wallace, the author, and he says, you will stop caring about what other people think of you when you realize how seldom they do.
Some people Dr. Phil quote too, because he says so.
It's just such a true statement. We live in a very world where we're moving from one point to another in our own lives, and so we're so consumed with what's in front of us and what we have to do and what we've already living in the past, living in the future, that the amount of time we really think about other people is not that high. And you got to think about it, that why would so many other people worry about you and what you did on stage or what you shared? Oftentimes they're more envious that you've done it and they can't.
Yeah. And a topic for another conversation is the role that social media plays in all of this, particularly with our younger kids and that have grown up in social media world, whereas I, didn't come to it till much later. So that has an impact on, I think, their sense of self, true sense of self. Well, that's an excellent segue into the next conversation, which is, I know Joe can speak to this and you can as an actor too, but I'm often talking to my students about understanding their own character within them, their own, who they are, and how do you take that and develop that into the characters you portray? And can you take that too far? How do they separate themselves from that so that they don't end up, method actors and end up the Heath Ledgers of the world? So can you speak to that particular topic?
Yeah, and I've always loved since the first time Joe brought up that kind of title of the character within us. It's such a fitting phrase, because there is this character within us, and we're the ones who know that character and feel that character, but we oftentimes are very willful at working to understand that character. And so on the on the therapeutic side of things, the way we tend to look at everything is in this uh, biosocial aspect, right? So there's essentially nature versus nurture, and so nature um, being genetically what you got from your mom and dad, whether it's attached to your lobes or eye color, hair color, height, weight, diseases, whatever that gets passed down to us that we have zero say so in. And then there's the nurture, how we're raised. What kind of parents did we have? Was it biological parents? Was it foster parents, grandparents, adoptive parents, no parents? Um, and then everything to what, class did we grow up in? What spiritual beliefs? What political beliefs? What part of the country were we in? And all of that plays into these, as I said earlier, those automatic intrusive thoughts that we have. It becomes the filter through which we see the world, and that is our character, right? That is how we respond or react to everything that's going on, all the things that are out of our control in front of us. And so it drives me nuts that our school systems don't touch mental health. We learn everything there is to know about the world and what's going on, except for what makes us tick, why we do the things we do, why we think the way we think. I've had people tell me that they didn't even realize until college that not everybody thought the same way they did.
Mhm.
And so that is what therapy is. It's a process of discovering that character. And I think, going to your question, the importance of that is because if we don't understand ourselves and why we do what we do, how in the world are we going to accurately portray, create, even in a script, a screenplay, right? How are we going to create these characters when we don't even have our own worldview under wrap, right? And we think we do, but we live in a society where our main coping mechanism is avoidance, right?
Very true. Very true. Very true.
That's why we love binge watching Netflix. That's why we love drugs and alcohol and sex and gambling and workout and food. It's all ways to prevent us from ever having to stop, think, and feel. And
Yeah.
that's where I feel if everyone, especially in the creative world, could take the intentional time, and it doesn't have to be a lot, it could just literally be journaling for 5 minutes a day, just getting your thoughts out. But taking time intentionally to work on your mental health, it will, I believe in my heart and soul, it will impact a person's ability to be as um, effective as they want and need to be.
Yeah, I love it. I think that's powerful. And I just from my own standpoint, I can say, I've always thought that I was a good teacher and a singer all my life. But the depth that has come into this sort of taking the time to figure out who I am from a mental health perspective and working through that therapeutically, journaling, being intentional in my relationships, how deeply that has impacted my teaching and my singing, definitely in my personal relationships. But sometimes we're fearful to do that, and it does take some time. It doesn't take a tremendous amount of time, but I think we're much more prone to popping open Facebook or popping open TikTok than we are to dealing with our own stuff.
For sure, for sure. Not that there's nothing wrong with mindless scrolling, but it managed time, right? Set a timer for yourself. Especially if you got Apple products, they will help you with limiting your screen time. You
Or
just got to set yourself up for success.
correct, I agree with that. So I know in talking with some people about our discussion tonight, several of them, particularly, I mean, in my own family, several of my stepchildren are involved in music, and one of my oldest son is involved in music, and one of the things they always are talking about is the fact that they need mental health care. It is most health insurance, I mean, even my health insurance, which is pretty good, doesn't cover mental health care. Some of them don't have it at all. And they're really struggling right now to take care of their emotional and mental well-being. What advice do you offer them? They're really struggling.
And it really drives me nuts that is the case. And I think it's just continues to amplify the stigma around mental health. The fact that different insurance agencies look at outpatient mental health treatment as a medical necessity, and others just don't. And I mean, even to the point where some insurances will cover individual therapy, but will not cover marital therapy, which is, I always jokingly, but not really jokingly, feel that that's the insurance companies and divorce attorneys being in cahoots together. Um, However, you're right. It is a unfortunate mess that a lot of people find themselves in, where they work really hard to have their medical insurance and to find that it does not cover the needs that they have, especially when it comes to mental health. There are different avenues, I believe, that you can take. In my experience, advocacy is your best policy for yourself. Fight, fight, fight the insurance companies. They are known to give in with enough resistance, and so enough pressure and consistency. So it is completely tangible to, let's say, for example, if you have a if you fall into the umbrella where you have a medical insurance, but a therapist that you do want to see does not is not in network with that insurance, right? Let's say you have United Healthcare, and you really want to see Susie Q over here, but she's not in network with United. She's in network with Blue Cross or other insurances. There oftentimes is a good argument that you can have if you have a good reason that you want to therapeutically see that person because they specialize in EMDR that you want, or it's a male or female therapist that you really want, or it's in proximity to your living arrangements that works for your work schedule, right? Something that is enough, right? You can call your insurance company and advocate for yourself that they will oftentimes give what's called a single case agreement, meaning that they will say, for this single case, we will look at Suzy Q as in network so you can use your benefits. Now, outside of that, there are avenues that you can go to find therapists who have sliding scale fees. It's a little bit more difficult these days as the economy, everything is inflation and everything costs more. Therapists have to also look out for themselves because sometimes the softest therapist heart, they have a hard time making a living. So they have to stick pretty strict to some of their fee schedules, structures. But there are often agencies that you can find who have, if you're in a position where you've got low income to a spot where you just can't afford it outside of paying your bills, there are places that have scholarships and things of that sort. NAMI, are you familiar with NAMI?
No,
I think it's National Alliance for Mental Illness. I think, don't hold me to that, but it is a national thing where most areas will have a hub. So, for example, here in South Carolina, it's NAMI of the Low Country. So, if you look that up, NAMI, it is a wonderful place that has tons of resources. Oftentimes, they even have support groups that are free, and they often have those in different categories, whether it's for someone who's going through domestic violence or someone who's grieving, someone who's a single mother, right? They just depending on your location, they will have different things of that sort. They oftentimes know resources and they connect with local therapists who have more sliding scales if you need that type of thing. Outside of that, there are wonderful, and pains me sometimes to say it, but influencers on social media that really do push great content. And oftentimes they're even folks who've written wonderful books, whether it's on parenting, whether it's on relationships. There's tons of great things. And then obviously podcasts, right? Great content out in the podcast world. So it's a difficult challenge. My biggest advice is don't get burdened down by the process. The process of getting to that therapist is the most difficult part of the therapeutic process as a whole. Once you can just get through that burden, it's often feels a lot lighter. There's another website that's called Psychology Today, and it's a wonderful website where you can search for a therapist just like you search for a car, right? And put in filters. So if you've got no insurance or you've got a specific insurance, but if your insurance just is refusing to look at mental health as a medical necessity, I'd say fight them, complain, argue, talk to them, debate with them, whatever you have to do, because you work hard for your insurance. And I believe that it's incredibly unethical for a medical insurance company to not at least consider that treatment in network.
I know another. Sorry.
You want me to go ahead? Yeah, I just had a quick kind of as a follow-up for those creatives out there that are listening, or just anybody that's listening. When I was in graduate school, I went to a therapist on a sliding scale, and mine was, I only had to pay $20. Now, I recognize that therapist was that was really cheap, but I was really poor, right, in the system. My point in bringing that up is Philip, is that I understand that it depends on the therapist, right, and their, I guess, company that they work for or whatever, but is it possible for somebody, young, who is, wanting this, to say this could be manageable? Because you think about, let's say, $25, they spend that possibly on coffee or on going out to eat. If you're investing in yourself, so I guess my question comes back to, is that, could they find something that reasonable? You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
you're bringing the hard truth, man. Yeah, that's really what it comes down to, is what is our mental health worth? What
Mhm.
investment is it worth putting into ourselves? And when we think about, if you really, really went and looked at how much you spend a month on eating out or coffee or entertainment, uh, subscriptions to streaming services for us to numb out on every night, and you really analyzed your financial state, you would find that you have enough money to go to therapists, even if you are going to pay full price. Now, you may not go multiple times a week, but the thing people have got to remember, the typical pattern, and I always tell this to clients when they're coming in for the first session, is I'm trying to work myself out of a job. I don't want to have to be their therapist forever, and they don't want to have to. Well, I do have some clients that would come forever. However, most people don't. So we look at this as a stepping stone. Now, depending on the complexity of your past and all that you've been through, as therapists, we can't really put a time frame on how long that's going to last. For some people, it could be 6 weeks. For some people, it could be 6 years. However, it's not typically, multiple times a week throughout that period. It's generally, yeah, you may go once a week in the beginning just to really build an established relationship with that therapist, because in my opinion, relationship is everything. It's almost, I would say, 80% of the therapeutic approach is that relationship. Because if you don't trust your therapist, please go find somebody else. Please, please, because you do not have to be obligated to continue to see somebody just because you had one assessment or 3 sessions. If you're not feeling it, you're not feeling it. And you cannot fight that urge to not trust someone. So go find someone that you can trust, even if you have to see 4 different therapists until you find the right one. Now, oftentimes therapists will talk to you on the phone to give a little, quick, brief talk to see if it's the right fit. Have some questions lined up. Ask them things that you want to make sure that they're okay with. Like, for example, I had a lady the other day asking me, "Am I okay working with someone who is a lesbian and in a relationship?" Great question, right? Because if I had bias towards that, she needs to know that. So I was really proud of her for asking that question. So, yes, you've got to really start to look at, what is your own life worth? What is having a life that's worth living? And most of us we can't even fathom what that is, because we've never done the work. If this was easy, everybody would do it. Everybody. But it's not. It's hard. But the things that hold the most weight in life are the things that are hard, the things that we push through. So if you have to find somebody on a sliding scale, find somebody, but you got to be patient. It may take a little longer. Now, another tip is, in the world of therapists, there are provisionally licensed therapists who are out of grad school. They have, finished all of their schooling. They are just doing a 2-year period of working under supervision, by someone, for example, like myself. And so that therapist is very competent. They have made it through the process of school. They have passed a board test. The state has given them a provisional licensure, so they're recognized by the state. And oftentimes they just need experience. And so you can get a really good rate often if you find somebody at an agency or even private practice who is a provisional licensure. You might be able to find that they have more discounted rates, and it's, helping them, helping you, everybody wins. Well, that's a great question, Joe, because it is not something a lot of people put into perspective of how much are they willing to spend on themselves.
Sure.
And I'll tell you, I used that as an excuse for years. I can't afford it. I can't afford it. And eventually it leaks out sideways in other areas of your life. And you get to the point where you're like, okay. And I made it a priority for sure.
Well, it's like, I always tell people it's that kind of quote of, if you don't work on your mental health, you will be forced to work on your mental health. And do you want to be proactive or reactive? And in a reactive society, it's easier to wait until, you know, proverbial crap hits the fan, but it's my opinion a lot more effective when you come in not in crisis and just wanting to better yourself. It's a lot faster, a lot cheaper.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I was going to say too, just as a small aside, that if you're living in a particular state and you have a particular health insurance carrier, you may find that the type of therapy you're seeking, there's not someone licensed in that state. So for instance, with EMDR, there was no one at the time that I selected a therapist who was licensed to practice EMDR therapy in the state of Alabama. And so that led me to my therapist who's actually in the state of Colorado. So some of those things may impact the type of therapist you can have under your insurance coverage. I know that affects it out.
For sure, right. If
Yeah.
you live in a rural area, there may not be as many options. But luckily, these days there are great platforms like BetterHelp and Talkspace and things like that, where it is a more affordable rate, and some people love it because they get to do it from the comfort of their home or on their lunch break at work, and they don't have to leave the office. So in this day and age, it's really, in my opinion, next to impossible not to be able to find an appropriate way to work on your mental health. It's not a one size fits all. Oftentimes you have to do a lot of work on your own before you're even ready to see a therapist. So find workbooks, listen to podcasts, get your head thinking in a way of bettering yourself. That way, when you actually go sit down with somebody, you're not starting from scratch. You can come in with a foundation that therapist can just then guide you through a more effective path.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, well, this next question is about how we deal with the big R, the rejection that comes about in what we do. We deal with rejection on a daily basis. What is your advice for specifically for performers and teachers, creatives, how they go about dealing with rejection, which is just a part of the whole thing?
Gosh, rejection, going back to the imposter syndrome and living with the shame inside of ourselves, it's that fear of having more evidence to shame ourselves. And if somebody doesn't like me, then do I still have worth? And I think, especially when it comes to the creative world, where so much is about your creative gift, your looks, your voice, your dancing. It's so hard not to take it personal, and that rejection is something that I honestly don't know if there's a way to take the sting away fully. It's more, what do we do with that uncomfortable? And it's remembering there's no way in life to escape uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
It's just going to be a part of life. And so if you have a hard time dealing with rejection on that bigger scale, from auditions or going to pitch an idea or a screenplay or whatever that might be, start working on smaller things. It's very hard to just get over that instantly. So my biggest advice is start working on the small no's, like asking a friend out to grab drinks or to dinner and they say no, right? How do you personalize that? If you send somebody a text and they don't respond, how are you internalizing that? And if you can't do it on the small things, you're really going to have a hard time being as successful in the bigger things, like rejection from a job that you desperately need because you're so in need of money, right? It's hard to deal with rejection that holds so much weight on your life. So start on the smaller things, work your way up. And we understand that when it comes to playing the guitar, right? I'm not going to play a Led Zeppelin song the first day I grab that guitar. We know it takes time and it takes practice and it takes hours and intentionality of sitting down with this guitar. But when it comes to our mental health, we think we just need to be able to get over it instantly. So my biggest thing is I feel you, you're validated, you're justified in your pain and uncomfortable feelings, but remember it's just a feeling.
Mhm.
And there's a cognitive distortion that I talk to a lot of people about, which is called emotional reasoning. I feel this, so it must be true, right? I feel like I failed, so I must have failed. I feel like they hate me, so they must hate me. I feel like I don't have worth, so I don't have worth. It's false. It's
Yes,
not true.
cognitive distortion, just the noise in the head. You're right, absolutely. And a lot of times when I'm working with my younger students, helping build them towards what I know is going to be, a good bit of rejection, helping them understand themselves and having a sense of self and having a sense of themselves as authentic, honest creators of what they're doing. And once they have that, that helps them, I find, navigate that better than when they just are in that just shell of a performance world where they have no sense of who they are. I think that's something built over time. That goes back to our conversation earlier about culture and how we as mentors culturally impact our students. And I think what we forget about too is that we consider ourselves mentors. We forget that the culture starts from within us first, how we treat ourselves and how we deal with ourselves, and then radiates out from that. And I think that goes back to, are we as mentors willing to do the dive into our own mental and emotional health and work on that, knowing we're impacting other people culturally around us as we move forward. So okay, so the last thing I want to ask you about, I've learned over this past year in my journey, which has been kind of crazy, but great, that I'm lifting big things,
Yes.
doing all sorts of crazy things I never thought I would do. My husband wants to take out additional life insurance policies on me and regularly films me doing crazy stuff and calls it my unnatural acts. And by unnatural acts, I'm like doing handstands on the wall and all these crazy races. And so what I really have learned over this past year is that my self-care, my mental health, my emotional health, my physical health, all of that comes together to serve the whole. I can't separate them out. So would you give us your best advice about self-care, mentally, emotionally, how all those things come together? What is your best advice for that?
Yeah, no, and I love that you gave those different parts. I think that's what I always really try to push with my clients is we've got our mental health, our physical health, and our spiritual health, and it's important that we have balance across them all. Everybody's is going to look different. Everybody's mental health is different. Everybody's physical health limitations are different. Their spiritual beliefs are different. And so it's not trying to push an idea. It's saying, what are you doing on a daily or weekly basis to work on all three aspects? And we're not often balanced with that. We spend a lot of time, yeah, maybe doing handstands on the wall, right? But are we doing enough over here with our spiritual health? Are we doing enough with our mental health? And so physical health gets a big push by our society, our looks, and is what we are bought into this belief that that's what gains us acceptance and respect. And so it's a really hard thing to fight. So being intentional is the key word. What are you doing? And it doesn't have to be a lot. It can be, just as I said earlier, 5 minute brain dump in a journal, just to make sense of your thoughts instead of letting them be overwhelming. But the biggest piece of advice I have, because there's a lot of stuff out there about self care. There really is. That you can really, if you are not seeing anything on self care, it's because you're just not looking. Is a lot of content that you can find. The biggest thing that I can say though is don't misunderstand self care with something that makes your future life more difficult. That's not self care. Saying I had a really crappy week, so I'm going to go and do some retail therapy this weekend, but then next week I can't pay my bills. That's not self care. That's making your future self stressed to the max. So just because you want something in this moment, you want to veg out for 6 hours on this new Netflix show, great. How is that impacting you though? Now, are you behind on laundry? Did you not grocery shop this weekend? So you're stressed and now spending more money during the week. That's not the heart of self-care. Self-care is saying, how can I take care of myself now, but how can I think of my future self? Right. And if that's something as small as, I hate waking up in the morning and going to work, so I'm going to set my clothes out tonight so that tomorrow I am just ready to go. I don't have to think about my clothes. And so that could be something that's super tangible to do. But again, it takes intentionality, and it's thinking about not just me right now and what I want, but what is going to make my life better, healthier, more effective. Right? I tell people all the time, it's not about good, bad, right, and wrong, because that's all relative on who you ask. Somebody could say it's a horrible idea to set your clothes out the night before because you don't know what mood you'll be in the morning. Right? It's a waste of time. Wait till the morning. So we can't go based on everybody's opinions on that. So it's saying what is going to be effective for your life. And most of the time, we know the things. We know without a shadow of a doubt the things that are going to make us happy. We just resist doing them. And so self care is learning to be self disciplined, which is learning to say no to ourselves.
Yeah, I love that. And that has such an impact on not only ourselves, but our relationships down the road. It's hard for 20-year-olds to think having grown children and what those decisions in 20s, how those decisions will impact your grown children and your grandchildren one day. And we're sitting on this side where I have grandchildren now. And I think, wow, but that's superb advice. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. All right, Joe, did you have anything else you wanted to offer this evening before we close up here?
No, just that I'm thankful Philip was able to join us. And I think, and hope that the listeners out there were able to gain some, tools potentially in knowing where to find resources. I know just with my own experience, it's been helpful, not just having Philip obviously in my life, but being willing to advocate, as Philip talked about, for yourself, and willing to make the sacrifices, whether it's me not getting coffee, as I mentioned earlier. It was beneficial. So I think this is great for all of us, Marianne.
I mean, Joe, to each your horn, I mean, your advocacy in your own stuff was getting a therapist to get a license in a different state, right? So that they could see you. So it is not taking no for face value, allowing yourself to push forward.
Yeah.
And it really also is about finding the therapist that best fits what you need. People will oftentimes, not that there's anything wrong with this, will gravitate towards a pastor as a therapist, and sometimes that might not meet the needs for what you need in terms of past issues. And so just really being an advocate for yourself and saying, I need this person to do this and this and this, taking the time to find that person.
I had a client who was a contractor, and he told me that it's the rule of the triangle, right? That you can have something fast, you can have something cheap, or you can have something quality. And you can only ever pick two, right? If you want it fast and quality, it's not going to be cheap, right?
Yep.
Fast and cheap, it's probably not going to be very quality. And so you've got to think of that almost kind of applies to therapists, right? If you need the cost to be down and low, you're probably not going to have access to the most quality therapist. And so it doesn't mean that it's going to be wrong for you, but you got to have to manage your expectations to meet your need right there, because it doesn't mean that in 5 years you may not have a different insurance or a different income level or live in a different state. And so the therapist that you start with is not the be all of end all where you're going to gain every bit of your information from it. I've got people that come and see me and I'm the 10th therapist that they've seen, and they learn a little bit new. So don't feel that whatever you commit to is it, and you're never going to do it again. It's just start. If you don't pull the trigger, then it becomes increasingly more difficult.
Yeah. I agree. And one thing that I want to note, just on regards to Philip, that the younger listeners that are listening to, your podcast, Marianne, Philip started out, as he talked about, this double major. He's now not only, yes, he's a therapist, but he's an entrepreneur as well, right? And we've talked about that, before on a different session with this. And I think it's important for these young people that are listening to know that it just because you're heading down one path doesn't mean that that's the path you have to go down. Could be you have these other gifts like Philip did to impact so many people's lives. I mean, Philip comes in contact with, probably he's had over 100 patients, probably well more in his career, and we as artists love the opportunity to get on stage and perform and touch someone, and Philip does that through a different venue. And it's exciting to see where when you look back, I've had the privilege of seeing Philip where he's come and where he is today, and it's exciting. And to give a little hope to those listeners that study with Marianne or listen to Marianne, and then others in your own teachers, that advocating for yourself, not giving up. There's opportunity. One thing that we didn't talk about, and we don't have time to go into, is just the suicide rate in the country today regarding mental health and the seriousness behind it. Just reminding people that you're not alone, right? And people like Philip, Marianne, myself, we're out there. Pick up the phone, So anyways, I just wanted to touch on that.
Yep, and just a quick plug, there are easily accessible suicide hotlines, suicide text lines if you don't feel like calling. Just a quick Google search will pull those up. Joe, I'll try to get you the
Yeah.
411 ones. I can't remember, but it's very important. Got to take it serious, and you got to talk about it.
That's very true. So for you guys who are tuning in, we will have links and information about a lot of what we've been talking about tonight in this particular episode of MK Speaks. I also want to let you know that if you would like to listen to all of the MK Speaks episodes, you can go to Apple Podcasts, but you can also go to the MK Speaks YouTube page and like and subscribe there, and you'll be able to view this episode free of charge and any others that we put up. Tonight, we have been having what I think is a meaningful discussion about mental health. The three of us are artists and creatives, but this is something that I think permeates our society, but we are particularly struggling with it right now in our creative economy. And never has there been a time where we've needed each other more and needed to be vulnerable with one another more. And so I want to thank my guest, Philip Searcy. I want to thank my co-host, Joe Hernandez, and hope that you guys can find some information that's useful and helpful here. And we're wishing you peace and blessings.
Bye.
Thank you.